Ole Bossdorf is our guest today from Project A. And yeah, Ole will talk to us about how to build successful data teams. Super interesting topic. And yeah, Ole has some really nice slides to share and a good talk. So yeah, Ole, the virtual stage is yours. I'm gonna switch off here and hand over to you.
Thanks, Marco. It's a very unusual setup. So I'm on stage right now, even though I'm still very much sitting at home. Looking forward to sharing some insights on how we at Project A think about how to build a successful data team. I will share my screen with you now. And you should see my slides in full screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, let's get started. So my name is Ole Bossdorf, and together with my colleague Martin, I'm in charge of the data team at Project A Ventures. Project A Ventures is a venture capital firm, so that might come across a bit unusual, but what we do is we don't just invest in companies with a high potential, but we also operationally support them very much. So we have a team of around 100 experts sitting in our office that really add value to our companies in marketing, HR, IT, and also data. I've been lucky enough to be with Project A for over 4 years now. And in that span of time, I was able to gain quite some experience supporting our ventures in different verticals, different industries, some just with a team of 3 founders, some almost going for IPO. So I saw some interesting problems and challenges. And just for the next 25, maybe 30 minutes, we'll just try to share my learning, share my experiences about which technology to use, how to structure a data team for optimal impact, things like this. Very happy to get to your questions as well after the presentation. So just bear with me for a little bit, and I guess I will give you also some food for thought on what to ask. So let's jump right in. What actually, or how does actually a successful data team look like? Well, you'll get this response that you already know probably from back university. It really depends. It depends on a variety of factors. And some of these are technology, some of these are the environment and industry. A lot of times, actually, it comes also down to the company size. So as we all know, companies, and hopefully also most of our portfolio companies, they tend to go through different growth stages. You could define them by various factors. I simply picked employees here for simplification. I do know that there are a lot of companies beyond just 500 employees, but I have less learnings, less experience to share in that regard. So for this talk, we will basically focus on recommendations for these 5 stages characterized by different number of employees. Now, companies go through these different stages, and they also tend to reach different levels of data maturity. Now, what is data maturity? Actually, this relates to a pretty corporate model from the company Dell that claims that there are different levels of data maturity. Every company starts in the data aware stage, where reports are largely non-standardized. Everybody is just kind of doing their own thing. There's no beloved single source of truth. And the company is only data aware. So what they're aiming for in this stage is basically for some kind of standardized reporting. So for some kind of central infrastructure where relevant data sources are integrated, and basically, sort of a company-wide platform for people to go to find their reports, find their numbers. Now that's only the second stage, because actually for higher data maturity, you would really need to base critical decisions on data. If you have a central infrastructure in place, there might still be some trust issues. People might rely more on their own silo thinking. So it's a really cultural task to move to the next level, which is the data savvy stage, where actually critical business decisions are based on data. And then some companies actually reach a little bit higher on this data maturity scale, and they become really data driven. And that actually means deploying machine learning at scale in various different processes. You have to walk through the previous stages to actually get there. And it's quite complex to do so. And we will get into that just in a minute. Now, for the reminder of these slides, I will basically always relate to those two things: the company growth determined by employees and the level of data maturity. I will also recommend some of the blog posts on which this talk is basically based on. And one comes up right here, which is definitely worth a read. And that's by Tristan Handy, called The Startup Founder's Guide to Analytics. And I use a lot of his recommendations also in these slides. I think he's a great writer when it comes to all things analytics and BI. So go check that out. Let's jump right into the very first stage, the founding stage. So this stage is basically characterized by lots of uncertainty. I mean, you as a founder might have just launched a product, some kind of service that you're trying to sell. You identified a certain market niche that you're targeting, where you see some potential. So here we talk about company sizes up to 10 employees. And of course, the only data maturity stage you can reach at this point is really being data aware. So simple questions would be like, who's actually using our product? How much revenue are we generating? There's no data team at this point. Company is still too small for this, too many uncertainties. And that's why there's also no real analytics stack. So you might work on some CSVs, you will probably work a lot in spreadsheets, where you also do your data transformation. And then you also visualize in spreadsheets, or maybe Data Studio if you are a bit more advanced. I mean, at this stage, it's all about survival. So intuition is still very much okay. We learned at Project A that great founders tend to have really great intuition, because they're actually able to identify this potential, this niche that other people simply can't see. But with a growing number of decisions, the intuition becomes less relevant, and you instead need to rely on a more centralized reporting. And we'll get to that in a minute. For this stage, it's very important to understand how people use your product or your service. So you have to get into this iterative cycle of basically collecting quantitative and qualitative feedback on how people use whatever you're building, and then analyzing this and using it to further improve the product. So some kind of data-driven product development. And also, if you're starting an e-commerce, leverage Google Analytics as much as possible. It's a super powerful tool that a lot of people actually underestimate. And that's what to do in this stage. What not to do is to invest in any BI stack. That's still way too early. You might be pivoting, or you might not survive the stage. And you also shouldn't skip proper data collection. I think analysis is for a bit later, but now you're actually setting yourself up for good insights by properly collecting certain events that matter, and certain customer interactions and so on. Now, hopefully you get through this first funding stage and you move into the early stage. Receive first Series A, not Series A, but maybe seed funding, pre-seed, the company growth to about 30 employees. And now you're still very much in this data aware stage. So a bit before actually having some kind of data infrastructure. Questions here are, where do our users drop off? Or how likely do marketing qualified leads convert into clients? The data team centers around a data ninja. What do I mean by that? Well, this stage is really determined by your ability to find this one person that can drive competency in data within your company. So find this one person that is able to identify potential, understand data and relevant sources, and really drive the company forward. This person might still very much work on a, well, lightweight stack, let's call it like that. So on CSVs, maybe writing some SQL directly on the backend application, or maybe on some read replica. Data transformation happens in Jupyter notebooks maybe, or through stored procedures. As I said, no real data infrastructure really happening at this point. Data visualization, hopefully still in open source and cost efficient tools like Metabase, Superset, Data Studio, and so on. What do you do in this stage? Well, you hire this knowledgeable data person that is not a technical person, but actually a business person. So this person is able to understand requirements and translate them into questions or requirements for the infrastructure to build in the next stage. So this person, the data ninja, should be able to build out a first entity model of which relevant entities actually exist for your company. This data ninja is not an intern. Interns leave and you will suffer from great knowledge drain. It's also not a data scientist. Data scientists care about hyperparameter tuning or feature engineering. They don't care about setting up basic infrastructure and basic BI reporting. So that's for later. It's super crucial, but not at this stage. It's all about defining relevant use cases, figuring out which entities are relevant for them, and then coming up with the infrastructure. And that's when we move to the mid stage. So at the mid stage, you sort of survived. I mean, you definitely survived. You might have even secured Series A financing at this point, and your company is growing up to 150 employees already. And now it's really finally the time to set up a scalable data infrastructure. And it should be set up based on the use cases that your data ninja was able to identify. So if marketing is really pressing for numbers, or you have huge shortcomings in customer service, these will be the first use cases that you will want to deploy in your data infrastructure. So that's where the data maturity stage is now data proficient. Questions here could be, what's our conversion rate by sales rep? Or how does the operation bottleneck change over time? And the team consists now of a head of data, one or two analysts, and also your first engineer, because yes, you're finally investing in a scalable data infrastructure. Now we do this 5 to 10 times a year for our portfolio companies. And that's why we tend to have strong opinions on which technology to use. I guess this becomes a philosophical question, because you could argue on and on about this. We really like for data ingestion to use Stitch, or its open source part, Singer, Fivetran, maybe Snowplow for tracking. For databases, we're big fans of Postgres, as long as the size doesn't extend over 1 terabyte. And otherwise, of course, you can leverage strong cloud databases like BigQuery or Snowflake. Redshift is a little bit older, but still super powerful as well. Here, it's really about transforming the raw data that you pipe into your data warehouse into something that people can actually work with. And you do that through data transformation frameworks like dbt. We're building our open source alternative of this called Mara, or you could use Dataform, that's also up and coming. And then visualize results in Metabase, in Superset, in Mode, totally up for discussion. So mid-stage, you really have to tightly plan and execute this first data warehouse MVP and publish the first dashboards for your stakeholders to check out. Doesn't have to be really deep analytical deep dives, but basically just creating some transparency on how the business is doing in different departments. Ideally, we recommend our founders, and unfortunately, for a lot of them, it's a bit hard to convince them, but we really recommend to add some data person to the leadership round. So having some head of data, director of data, or even CDO really high up in the management circle, because this person will be able to identify which strategic topics are actually relevant for the data team, which data sources will gain an importance in the future, and so on. We see the head of BI being too often hidden below the CPO or the CMO, and then they don't get the knowledge they actually need to build out a good infrastructure. And then you purposefully grow the team, not too fast, also not too slow. When building out your infrastructure, don't skip software engineering best practices. So something like pipelines as code, version control is highly critical to ensure proper documentation, scalability, and onboarding new team members. And also don't write too many custom jobs here, because you will need to maintain them and you will create too much technical debt a bit too early. Let's move to the growth stage, very exciting stage, where you now move up to 500 employees and you have your scalable data infrastructure in place. You're really aiming to become data savvy as an organization, and you really are basically scaling your analytics team by now. And there's different approaches to this. Data questions at this point could be, how do new product features affect our customer lifetime value? So you see this gets a bit more complex, requires some hands-on deck to dive into data and find out what actually matters. Or also, which attributes are most important to predict retention rate? Your data team really grows at this point. There will be a director of data or CDO, hopefully in the leadership team. There will be dedicated analysts for each team, data engineers, hopefully also data scientists, because by now you should have the proper amount of data to actually dive into prediction problems. You might also have something like a data architect or data ops person that helps with increasingly complex DevOps for your infrastructure. The potential analytics stack might change a bit. You might add Kafka here if there are any really valuable real-time cases. Your databases will still be very much cloud-based probably. You will still transform your data in dbt, maybe Airflow, and visualize it in Looker, Mode, Tableau, Metabase. I mean, there's a long list to this. These are just recommendations from us as the Project A data team, but of course there are many alternatives. What to do in the growth stage? Well, you have to make a conscious decision, and there's a good article about it that I will also post later on. But you basically have to make the decision, do you treat data as a product or do you treat data as a service? If you treat data as a product, what you will do is basically just surface relevant data and make it available to the business, giving them access to a data mart or some place where they find data sets to crunch and pivot themselves. You could also treat data as a service, and that actually means more tying relationships, sitting down with stakeholders, trying to understand what they really need, not what they're asking, and then figuring out solutions together. That requires a much bigger data team, as it requires a much bigger group of analysts. So you have to make that conscious decisions, and both can work. You do, if you go for the embedded data team, need to recruit some kind of data spokesperson in every department, so the department can be onboarded as well. And then you finally have your data scientists in your team, so you can start impactful machine learning projects with actual focus on impact, which with machine learning, as a lot of you know, is more challenging than people might think in the beginning. What not to do at this point? Well, don't fall into the trap of just providing data. We did this mistake way too often in the past, where we were sort of done with the first version of a data warehouse, gave people access and just hoped that they would make better decisions. But that's not done here because you actually have to put a lot of effort into documentation, managing metadata, and making sure that people actually know what's there and how it can be used. So it becomes more and more of a cultural problem. And this is a really nice article that I recommend everybody to read, which is from the folks at GitLab. And they basically have this Bible on how they organize their data team. And it's all very public and very, very detailed actually. So go check that out. I can also share slides later and you find links to these articles that I'm recommending as well. Final stage, scaling stage. Now I know there's a lot of more stages beyond just 500 employees, but like I said, I have less insights into how actually to support them. So let's treat the scaling stage for now as the final stage where you have more than 500 employees and you're really aiming for data maturity level of data savvy. Questions here could be, how do we detect fraud in real time? Real time adds another layer of complexity to your infrastructure. So definitely worth evaluating if you actually need real time. And also you have more data than ever. So question would be on the infrastructural side, how do we build a cost-efficient multi-cluster data warehouse? Or could have added more buzzwords here maybe. Anyways, so your data team is huge by now. There's a chief data officer, there's a couple of data team leads, maybe a head of BI, head of data infrastructure, head of analytics. You have analysts, you have machine learning and data engineers that cater to data scientists. So it's a pretty big organization by then, pretty powerful as well. The analytics stack will change a little bit as it becomes probably a bit more custom. I tried to put in some hipster tools here like Dexter, Druid, ClickHouse, which you can see popping up in lots of online discussions. At this point, it's all about finding something that scales quite well without exploding costs. And that calls sometimes for custom infrastructure, sometimes for off-the-shelf products that then need to be modified, but that actually is up to you by now. What to do? Well, you shouldn't consider the data warehouse as like the final destination or sort of like the final stop, but actually from there, you can reintegrate valuable data into tools that people use on a daily basis. So you can shoot back attributed marketing data to Google Ads, or you can upload churn probabilities of your clients to Salesforce. So really think about what do people use on a daily basis and which data can help them make better decisions. And that also goes along with investing heavily in data literacy of the entire company. So by now you have a team big enough to really make sure that they can train and that they can help with self-service for all departments so that everybody knows actually which data is available and how to use it. And you can deploy machine learning models for micro level optimization really at scale, wherever it actually makes sense. There's also some infrastructural mistakes that you can do at this point. I think Hadoop adds so much complexity that you can only really use it with terabytes of data. And the same goes for streaming technologies like PubSub, like Kinesis, like Kafka that are hard to manage. So think twice before actually diving into that. We ran quite quickly through 5 stages. So let's wrap it all up. In the beginning, in the founding stage, it's important to unlock this iterative product development. So gather data about your product, analyze it, and based on that, help improving your product. Then you move on to the early stage where you really have to hire this data ninja that can move data as a competency forward in your business. And then you finally start investing in a scalable data infrastructure. And you purposefully grow the team in order to onboard the entire company, which is definitely a crucial cultural task, not as much a technology task. And then finally, in the scaling stage, you can actually deploy machine learning at scale to optimize various processes all around your business. Let's get back for a little second to company growth and data maturity. Now, we went through these 5 stages, and we knew that, or we identified certain data maturity levels that are required for each of these stages. Now, this nice article, the surprising link between a company's growth and its data analytics strategy, actually claims, and we very much agree with that, it actually claims that the maturity of a company's data strategy, or its data maturity curve, often lags its growth curve. So what does the author mean by that? Well, basically, while your company is still growing heavily, a lot of businesses, also in our investment portfolio, they tend to be stuck in this data proficiency stage. They don't really see the pain of not having a centralized and well understood, well documented data infrastructure. And they don't really feel the pain of people not basing critical decisions on data. That only comes later. But they do pay the price for it later on, because for a sustainable and ongoing company growth, you actually need to onboard the entire company and use machine learning at scale to really move on. Otherwise, your competition will basically just surpass you. So interesting article, definitely worth checking out. That's also an interesting quote that I found, which is very much in alignment with how we think about data. And it says, most of the data industry is focusing on the sexy things like AI and big data. Well, the truth is companies will have problems with the process of making decisions using data they currently have long before they are ready for AI and big data. We see founders being incredibly brainwashed about the importance of data science. And before even revenue of €1, they already have hired a team of 3 data scientists that are frustrated because there's no data to crunch, and they have to embark on certain infrastructure tasks that they didn't study for and that they didn't start their job for. So there is this pyramid that you've seen whenever you attend some kind of data conferences. You've probably seen this pyramid, but it's actually quite correct. So you first have to collect data, move it, store it, explore and transform it to actually centralize it and make it transparent. And then you have to really go through these steps. You can't just jump 1 or 2 phases before you get to meaningful and also impactful AI and deep learning. So there is quite a foundation to be built before hiring data scientists. What does it all imply for the successful data team we're talking about today? It needs a certain customer centricity. So whatever the stakeholders need should be the focus point, and you should collaborate to reach a solution together. It needs laser use focus. Explorative tasks like POCing random technologies or diving into explorative analysis, they will slow down the business if there's no central reports in place where people can just check basic data. So be careful with that and keep your focus. Invest in a scalable infrastructure that doesn't slow you down and that helps you reach important use cases without any technical debt. And then finally, data literacy is one thing that we focus more and more at Project A. So significant time is actually spent on empowering users, because what we've learned partially the hard way over the past years is that this data topic always starts and ends with culture. And that's it already from my side. So I'm looking forward to seeing your questions.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ole. That was super interesting. And actually, there were so many things in there that we can absolutely relate to from our day-to-day work at Pandata. Like really so many things, especially what you said about the sexy tools or the hipster tools and people being brainwashed about them. This is really, really an issue that we see a lot. Also,
Yep.
at that point, I want to quickly appreciate we have 52 people in the audience, which is really, really cool. This is much more than I had expected, to be honest. So far, we don't have any questions. I have a few myself, though, so I'm gonna ask those first. But to everyone in the audience, now is the time. Ask Ole any question you'd like to hear him answer. Actually, there's one coming right now, so I'm gonna prioritize these over mine. So Milan is asking, many thanks for the presentation. Can it make sense to organize a data team in a Scrum process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Scrum. We do daily stand-ups ourselves, and also work in sprints partially. So definitely makes sense for me to work in Scrum to some extent, but it can't be too rigid. So not too many rules. There has to be certain flexibility for urgent requests coming in. But definitely can work.
While we wait for more questions, I have one, which is actually very closely tied to what I said before. How do we actually avoid that people would use those, as you call them, hipster tools or sexy tools too early and in a maturity stage that would be too early for those tools?
Yeah, interesting question. So hopefully you get some sort of management buy-in to make sure that the founders actually understand what is a hipster technology and what's actually a helpful technology. Founders might not have sufficient time to really get into that. But what you should always ask yourself, I mean, we're very impact driven. So what you should always ask yourself is, well, let's assume this technology is up and running. What does it really help us do? And if the only answer is, well, it's really cool that it's up and running, then that's not really that's not really powerful. So
Cool.
if it enables you to, I don't know, like really strengthen a certain a certain department or something, then it's worth investing. But just because it's cool.
I couldn't agree more. We have two more here. One from Steffen or Stephen Pastan. Would you mind saying a bit more about the data ops / data architect roles you mentioned? What is their function in particular and what value do they add?
Yeah, they add huge value actually. So there is this great blog post that you can check out, or it's actually a company called Data Kitchen that are solely focused on DevOps for data applications. And the blog post is called the Data Ops Manifesto. And they basically also claim that even though this is largely a service role, so the end user might not understand its importance, it's really crucial to have a solid infrastructure in place. And that's the data architect's job. So this person, he or she, needs to find out what are the different modules in our data stack, data ingestion, storing, I don't know, visualizing and so on, and how can these be plugged in optimally. So there's cool tools to find out, like to leverage here, like Terraform, lots of complexity with streaming and so on. But I see these data architects for bigger companies becoming really relevant because they sort of ensure the overall reliability.
There's more questions. We have one from Johan. Hey, very cool presentation, thanks. I see you mentioned some paid software in the early stages, in brackets Stitch, and more open source, in brackets Python. In the later, more mature stages, should it not be the other way around? Less cost first and more expensive, easy to manage later on?
Interesting. Well, there is this common problem. How do you move data into your data warehouse? And for a long time, we built custom connectors to do that, but then you have to maintain them because APIs are changing and it all becomes a lot of technical debt. So that's why we do use Stitch quite often. Only for like custom things where Stitch doesn't have connectors, you would actually need to use Python. But I mean, this problem is solved. So you're not creating any value by pulling data from an API and storing it into your data warehouse. So that's why you want to outsource this as soon as possible. And Stitch for a lot of our companies costs like $200 a month or so. So almost open source.
So we have 4 more questions here. One from an anonymous attendee. For what kind of use case would you actually apply machine learning? Finding customers or anything else?
I mean, there's tons. Of course, you have to first ask yourself, do you have enough data? Because all these algorithms, they live off proper data collection, proper data storing and transformation. But if you have enough data, you can actually look into a couple of things. What we do, we leverage something called tree boosting, which some of you probably are familiar with. And we use this algorithm quite often to, for example, identify what makes people order again, what makes people come back, what turns them into loyal customers. And these are really crucial questions for your business. So we tend to use them a lot on the customer side to identify, also then for marketing, where should they put their money, on which segments and so on. So it's a lot about CLV prediction, churn prediction, these kind of things, where I think you can add a lot of value through machine learning.
Cool. Then the next one is from Felix. Thanks for the great presentation. I was wondering, what is your take on using open source tools like Metabase? Until what size of company are they suitable, desirable, and when should you switch to more advanced tool with drill down functionality, etc., that make it easier for others to use self-service?
Okay. I'm a huge fan of Metabase. I think for it being open source, they are more valuable than some paid tools. So I would leverage open source as long, as long as possible, pretty much. So as long as it doesn't set too many boundaries to what you want to do. If the company is well funded and there's actually more things requested from stakeholders that make sense and that can only be solved through paid tools, then go ahead and do that. But open source, I mean, Postgres is also insanely powerful. Stitch has this single part, which is also open source. So you can get really far with open source tools these days, which is really great.
Konrad has a really good one, very short. There is no I in data. Do you think this is a coincidence? I don't know how you want to comment that, but I think it's a really cool statement.
Yeah, I mean, on a deeper level, it's a cultural task, data, first of all, not a technological one. So only value is created by working together. So there's a T for team, which is probably not a coincidence.
That's the cultural aspect is so true. This is what we see so much in our work, that a data project is often a change project as well.
Yeah.
Bijan asks, how do you convince a founder to grow their data team beyond the data ninja in time, in brackets?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you can be lucky with a founder that is already very much aware of the value of data, or you can be a bit more unlucky and founders think that it's more about like sales, marketing, that scale their company. So I think you can just show that through really good insights, basically maybe also some sort of, I mean, you're a data person, so you can calculate in some way that it's really ROI positive probably, and show basically some insights that were not possible without a data ninja, and then convince the founder that if they want access to more of these insights and want to empower more departments, then that's only possible by growing the team, and not just growing the sales and marketing team, but actually growing the data team as well.
Malte Barth asks, you said that even in the scaling stage, the company should be ideally data savvy. When is the turning point to really focus on being data driven?
Data driven, well, yeah, also that's a really tough question, but a good one from Malte. So I think once the company is really onboarded on how to use data, how to pivot it, how to analyze it, and so on, and you have sufficient data available and also the data science expertise in-house, then it's time for you to figure out which processes actually need our help, where in the product could we actually identify cool, I don't know, visual recognition algorithms or something that speeds up the process even further, but only if you have sufficient data and expertise in-house, and most of your stakeholders have their reports available, because you don't want to dive into. I mean, the problem with machine learning projects is that you can't promise anything. It's like you could spend hours, days, weeks on something, and that it simply doesn't work. So that's why you first need to get the basics right and have reports available and online, and then you can actually dive more into these explorative work, I'd say.
Milan asks, which skills are essential for leaders in the data team?
Yeah, we'll get back to culture again and again here. So, I was an analyst for 2-3 years before taking over the business intelligence team at Project A, and I still very much miss the days of working really operational as an analyst. But what you have to learn as a leader is to like empathy, pretty much. So tie close relationships to stakeholders to really understand how they can be helped. And then it's not thinking about, okay, which analyses and which tools can help them, but actually like what are the problems, what are the decisions that they need to make on a daily basis, and how can I support those with relevant data. So it's creating empathy, it's creating relationships, and it's also caring a lot about what your team does and about your team's impact and success, not that much anymore about your own.
So we have one last question here from Mincy Wang. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions if somebody still wants to ask something. Mincy Wang asks, thanks for the great presentation. Can you please comment more on your process for providing data as a service versus product beyond regular reporting to internal stakeholders?
Yeah, this is this whole discussion. So the article will be linked. I think the author can describe it a bit better, but it's this whole discussion about, do you treat it as a service? Do you actually sit down with somebody and find out what they really need? Or do you treat it as a product and just send somebody basically access to a data warehouse so they can explore the data themselves? And there's pros and cons to both approaches when it comes to cost and when it comes to execution speed and so on. But I would always go for the data as a service part, but that usually also leads to more data sources that need to be integrated, more metrics that need to be calculated. So it's a lot more work. So you probably also don't want to do that with too many departments at the same time, because then your analytics team is pretty much underwater.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. So far, no more questions here. I think that was really, really cool and really insightful. If you have any last thing that you would like to share with us, obviously feel free to do. Aside from that,
I'm really happy that there's still 56 people around. So close before dinner. So really happy that so many joined. I'm happy to share slides in the group afterwards, and yeah, let's keep in touch.
Yeah, actually, there's one last question that just dropped in. I think we can do that from Omar. Is it better to have one data team or different data teams per department?
Well, you have to be really aware of silos. So I think there should only be one central data platform where all relevant data sources are integrated and also transformed. That shouldn't happen at different parts of the business. So corporates are very much struggling with this because they sort of grew organically, and there's the same reports, the same analysis, the same jobs running in different buildings, basically. So that's creates a lot of unnecessary additional cost. So I think there should be one core data infrastructure team, definitely, Of course, in a large corporation, you can have specific like analytics teams for each department. So like a sales analytics team, a product analytics team, that's fine, but they should all work with on the same platform, because otherwise, I mean, you suffer from credibility, and team A will say, we have 10,000 customers, and the other one will say, no, we have 12,000. And then it's just a definition problem. So there should definitely be just one data platform team, and then there could be multiple analytics teams.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. That was really, really cool. I think for the very first time digital, this was an absolute success. I'm very astonished how well this went and how smooth. Thank you very much. That was really, really cool. Usually I would say now stick around for a beer and let's have a chat. Unfortunately, that's the part that falls short in the digital realm. But what we will do is revive the Analytics Network Slack channel. That's a Slack channel that we had set up for the Meetup quite a while ago. I think it's already 2 years old, and it yeah, staled a bit, to be honest. I think because the Meetup itself is a very tangible, very much physical experience in a way, and not so much a digital one with regard to the networking. So I think it's but I think it's a really good time to revive that channel and to really make use of it. So I will send around an email with that, and obviously we will send around the slides from Ole as well, so that you can review those later for yourself. And yeah, I think that's about it for today. Thank you very much for joining. Really, really cool. And yeah, hope to see you in the next one. Obviously, hopefully not digital, but we'll see.